You ever have one of those mornings where you wake up just wanting peace and quiet? Nothing fancy, just a few hours to yourself, and then by lunchtime you find yourself practically on trial for the world's dumbest crime. Yeah, that was me. I was just hoping to catch a few bass on Lake Harmony like I'd done 100 times before, but instead, less than an hour later, I'm standing in front of a group of neighbors getting scolded for the crime of sitting in my granddad's old fishing chair. I know, right? If you've ever dealt with someone who just loves being in charge for the sake of being in charge, you know exactly the flavor of crazy I'm talking about. Honestly, let me know in the comments if this sounds familiar. I need to know I'm not the only one living in a sitcom. You'd think all I'd have to do was show how ridiculous this was and that would be the end of it. That's what I thought too, but nope. This whole circus dragged on for 6 months, emptied out most of my savings, and turned into a war I never asked for. So let me back up and show you how an ordinary morning spiraled into the wildest fight of my life. My name's Grant Miller, and I'm a remote software engineer living out of a cabin I inherited from my grandfather right up by Lake Harmony. It's a little slice of heaven about 2 hours north of the city. The water's so clear you can see every pebble 20 feet from the dock. My granddad bought the place back in '62, and from the time I was 8, we'd sit together on the dock, me learning how to cast him, giving me advice about fishing life and everything in between. That old wooden chair, yeah. The one that started all this, he made it with his own hands. When he passed away, he left me the cabin, 40 acres of lakefront, and a lifetime's worth of memories. The setup fit me perfectly. I'd code during the week, then spend my weekends fixing up the place fishing or just soaking in the quiet. Most of the folks around were retired or second-generation lake families. Everyone knew each other, everyone minded their own business, and you could go months without a single bit of drama. At least that's how it used to be. Enter Paula Whitmore. 29, works in marketing, fresh out of the city, always dressed like she's on her way to sell you a condo, except her fancy polyester dresses wrinkle if you so much as breathe. First thing I noticed about her was those platform sandals made her totter like a newborn deer anytime she left the sidewalk. Second thing, she'd accessorize with these plastic hair clips that sparkled so much you'd think she was trying to flag down airplanes. But hey, I figured as long as she kept her brand of ambition on her side of the property line, no harm done. Famous last words. 6 months after she moved in, she wrangled her way into being HOA president. Red flag, I know, but I kept my head down. Then came that October morning air-crisp sun warming your face, the lake like glass fish practically begging you to catch them. I made coffee, grabbed my granddad's chair, and settled in for what should have been a perfect day. Didn't even get halfway through my second cup before I heard that infamous click-clack down my gravel drive. Paula. She shows up in a blinding yellow dress hair clip sparkling face set like she's here to deliver a warrant. "Mr. Miller, that chair violates our community aesthetics," she announces. At first I thought she was joking, but her face, dead serious, caked with makeup in colors that honestly shouldn't exist outside a paint store, said otherwise. Then she whips out a violation notice like it's some kind of badge. $150 fine just for sitting in a chair. I tried explaining my granddad built that chair. It's part of the place. Heck, it's part of the community. She just gives me that look, you know, the one people give when they're convinced you're too dumb to understand how smart they are. Standards matter, Mr. Miller. That she points at the chair like it's toxic waste doesn't fit our vision. Then she hands me the violation jewelry flashing turns and click-clacks back up the drive. I stood there, notice in hand, looking at the lake and that chair, thinking this can't be real life. But it was, and it was about to get worse. I started digging, figuring if I was going to fight this, I needed to know who I was up against. Turns out, Paula had only been HOA president for 6 months, won with, get this, 4 votes. But she'd joined something called the Lake Visionaries, a group that had a history of turning places like ours into premium lakeside destinations. Translation, they buy up everything. Push out old families, bring in developers, jack up prices, and suddenly your home is a luxury resort you can't afford to live in. It didn't stop at my chair. 3 days later, I found 2 more violation slips, one for unauthorized waterfront furniture, the other for non-compliant dock maintenance. Fines now totaled $750. She started hammering signs into my yard at night, declaring, "Do not fish by order of Lake Harmony OA." But she hadn't counted on Eli Burke, my neighbor, who knew every inch of these properties. Eli's the kind of guy who doesn't let anything slide. He found Paula's sign, called her out in front of the whole neighborhood, and when I filmed it and put it online, the clip spread like wildfire. Paula doubled down. She called an emergency HOA meeting, rolled out her grand vision for Lake Harmony 2025, which basically meant kicking out anyone who didn't fit her version of perfection: no fishing, no boats, no old docks. She put on a big show, but the twist came when Agnes Rowley, 77, sharp as a tack, stood up and calmly asked where Paula got the authority to regulate stuff that wasn't in the original HOA agreement. Paula tried to brush it off, but the old-timers in the room exchanged looks and you could feel the tide shifting. But Paula wasn't done. Next thing I know, I'm getting calls from county inspectors, complaints about my dock, my shed, my wiring, even my septic system. All inherited, all grandfathered in. I called my buddy Cal Weston, a real estate lawyer who grew up dealing with HOA nonsense. We went through every document my granddad ever signed, and there it was. A clause stating our property was grandfathered, protected from all the new HOA rules, as long as we kept doing what we'd always done. So I showed up at this next meeting, laid out my paperwork, and you'd think that'd end it. Nope. Paula's face got tighter, her voice got higher, and she basically threatened to make my life miserable. That's when I realized she wasn't acting alone. The Lake Visionaries weren't just a club, they were a well-oiled machine, and our lake was their next big project. And just when I thought I couldn't get more exhausted, Paula started bringing in reinforcements. More inspectors, more fines, more harassment. My mom even called telling me maybe it was time to give up the fight. For a minute, I almost listened. But then Agnes Rowley came by with a folder full of research. She dug up the Lake Visionaries' whole playbook, how they take over communities, squeeze out longtime residents, turn everything into high-end real estate. This was bigger than a chair. It was about preserving a way of life. That night, I stayed up researching everything I could about property law and HOAs. Turns out, we property owners have more rights than we think, but we have to be smart. So I asked Cal, what would it take to buy the whole Lake Sounds wild right? But Cal started digging and found out something incredible. My granddad almost bought the water rights back in the 70s, and the original seller, a man named Harrison, still owned the undeveloped land. Even better, my granddad had a right of first refusal written into the agreement, and Harrison was still alive and getting pressured by, you guessed it, the Lake Visionaries. We met up with Harrison, who turned out to be as stubborn as my granddad was. Developers had been hounding him for years, but he wanted the place to stay a refuge for regular folks, not some billionaire's playground. Paula found out about our meeting and tried one last desperate play, calling another community-wide meeting, broadcasting it live, accusing me of colluding with outsiders to ruin everything. I walked straight up, put the evidence in front of everyone, and explained how Paula and her friends had been angling for a takeover. The crowd went silent, then Eli spoke up, then Agnes, and pretty soon everyone saw Paula for who she really was. I dropped the final bombshell, showed the purchase agreement, making me the new owner of Lake Harmony with all rights protected for the community. Paula melted down, tried to deny everything, but then Agnes stood up, lawyer voice on, and read her the riot act about surveillance, harassment, fraud, you name it. Turns out some of the folks in the back were from the county attorney's office there to document everything. Paula and her husband bolted out her hat, finally falling off in the parking lot, leaving the rest of us wondering how we ever let her run the show. After that, things turned around quick. Paula was charged with harassment, fraud, and a half dozen other things. She lost the house, her marriage, her reputation. Neil, her husband, came by to thank me. Turns out he'd been just as trapped as the rest of us. Agnes became the new HOA president and rolled back all of Paula's rules. The fines were canceled, the ridiculous signs came down, and Eli carved a new welcome sign dedicating the lake to my granddad. I set up a community trust for the lake public access for everyone, no more development, just a protected place for families to build memories. Within months, the neighborhood was thriving. People were out fishing, helping each other. Kids were learning the same lessons I learned when I was young. No more fear, no more fake rules, just people living together the way it's supposed to be. Funny thing though, even after all that, I started getting messages from folks in other communities asking how we fought back. Guess Paula and the visionaries weren't the only ones trying to steamroll neighborhoods. So maybe that's the real moral here. Sometimes you have to fight for what matters, not just for yourself, but for everyone who comes after you. And if you've ever been through something like this, or you've got a neighbor story of your own, drop it in the comments, because community isn't something you protect once it's something you defend together every time it's threatened. So, what would you have done?